Hello.
Good evening, Anthony, and good evening, Graham.
Hello, Charles.
Sunday night, and we are in, what phase are we in? We're in a post-election phase,
Very nice.
and so we may come on to look at that at some point and what the implications of that might be. But we might just wait and actually till Keir Starmer delivers that
No,
first
well,
speech on that.
we're not two big politicians in a small car, Charles. I think we should deal with it right now, but deal with it very briefly, which is
Okay,
as you said.
Okay, let's do it that way, Graham, because we
Yeah.
assessed the manifesto's stroke contract for the people before, and we're now in a position where the Labour Party will be the one controlling the purse for the arts world. What are your hopes and what are your wishes?
Well, to be very brief on this, because we're not a political channel, we're not Rory Stewart and what's his face, Campbell. I was going to say Ali Campbell. I was going to say Ali Campbell, but he's in UB40. But now that'd be an interesting idea. Rory Stewart and UB40 in a podcast together.
Yeah, that would be. Well, if it's Alistair Campbell, it might be red wine with an H, but I didn't say that.
Oh yeah. I believe he did used to do a lot of red wine in his glory days in Downing Street. But,
we're straying into trouble, Graham. That's.
I'm sure he doesn't anymore because I've met him and he's a very straight guy.
Yeah.
But, well, you pointed out 2 weeks ago, and I poo-pooed it, and I was very rude to you and talked to you like you were some sort of idiot.
Argumentative was the word you used, I think.
Yeah, about the arts, but you were sort of correct, because when the Tories came to power in 2010, they made an immediate 30% cut to the Arts Council England's budget.
Yeah.
And on top of that, in 14 years of Tory government, they had 13 different culture secretaries, which tells you they had no interest in it whatsoever, except to save some money. So even though I poo-pooed at the time, in retrospect, you were right. So I think, despite the dire situation they've inherited, a very sensible Sir Keir Starmer government at some point, I think, will support the arts. I think it's in their nature.
Yeah, I mean, so Lisa Nandy has been appointed to the role, and I think she always impresses whenever she's on television doing interviews and whenever she takes part in discussions, and she gives as good as she gets on those. They're very forthright, and I think is likely to be potentially higher profile in that role than might have been the case in recent times under the Tories. So that, again, I think might well be beneficial. The proof will be in the proverbial pudding, of course. I know that. And to be honest, as you pointed out, we're not expecting the arts to be the priority over the NHS, nor the priority over education, nor the priority even over immigration issues right now. I've said before, the importance of well-being in terms of health, actually the arts filters into that most strongly, and it's important therefore to look at how that can help that to be the case, because that's case absolutely proven that is where the arts does wonders for the world, and it also has the benefit of teaching people to find confidence, people to find some form of discipline, a sense of achievement. There is so much that's meritorious about the world of the arts, and I'm just hoping that plays out within this government, but it might be a little bit down the line. I think that's perhaps the realism with this.
Right, I think you're entirely right, Charles, and I think we should move on with a simple statement. It's a new era. Hurrah!
Era. I think that's absolutely fair, Graham, and we just wait and judge in time. Now, Graham,
exactly.
You have been reading a new book by the Sunday Times art critic about collecting legend Jim Eade, who was the creator of Kettles Yard in Cambridge. Name the art critic, first of all, in the Sunday Times. Name the book as well, and then we'll look at his role.
Yeah. It's Ways of Life, Jim Eade and the Kettle Yard Artists by Laura Freeman, who's the chief art critic at the Times.
Yes, yes.
Or at least she was when the book was published in hardback late last year. I don't think it's come out in paperback yet, but it must be coming out in paperback. It's a brilliant book. And as you know, I've been to Kettles Yard at Cambridge, which now has a separate art gallery to the actual house that Jimmy owned with his wife Helen. And that's where I famously met Wei Wei, the Chinese peasant artist, which I've only mentioned about 50 times. So I'm not
that's cropped up quite often. No way.
Indeed. So Kettles Yard is an amazing place, but Jimmy himself was and the thing about Jim is that he crosses over into Scottish things as well, which is always good for me. So his wife Helen was actually Scottish, and he was actually born near Cardiff, but he was never really Welsh. I mean, he was born in 1895, and he came from a fairly posh background.
Like Vinnie Jones, never really Welsh. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, but he came from a fairly posh background, but he didn't really go posh because he didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge. Instead, he went to the Edinburgh College of Art in 1913. But by the 20s, he was working the Tate in London, fairly low down at first. And at the Tate in the 20s in London, he was a lone voice for modern art like Picasso. At that point in Britain, the British art establishment thought Picasso was a completely untalented lunatic who'd gone way too far. And he was like a lone voice pushing to get the Tate to actually buy Picassos when they were quite cheap, and buy all the modern artists in the early 20th century were quite cheap then, which he wasn't totally successful with. And he also helped Edinburgh's main gallery, the Scottish Gallery, get its hands on some proper modern art at a time when it was very controversial. But what is made him famous is Kettles Yard, because although he was an art critic, wrote for art magazines, although he was a book writer, wrote the book Savage Messiah about the sculptor Henry Gaudier, and although he collected art, bit of an art dealer, he wasn't really any of those things. He was really an amateur gentleman of the old school, based his life and his pursuits on passion rather than like professional aims. So he turned his house at various times into his own art gallery, a space that he lived in, which was festooned with proper modern artworks that he'd bought from artists, even though he could scarcely afford to buy them. And he kept on doing this throughout his life. I mean, he started off in London. He turned his house into a house of art with his wife. He went to Tangier, turned his house in Tangier in a house of art. Briefly lived in France, turned his house there in a place of art. And he eventually ended up in his later years in Edinburgh, where again he turned his house in a house of art. So that every nook and cranny would have a piece of art or a piece of found art from nature, like pebbles on the beach. And it would be a house you could live in. It wasn't like an art gallery, but it was designed in a sort of balanced fashion to combine your life with the art. So you were surrounded by art and you were part of it, and it was an actual thing. And he also, and that's why you've still got Kettles Yard. It was such a great place. And if you go around it, you understand what an amazing house it was. The Cambridge University eventually bought it. And I mean, he built an extension in the 60s, and he wrote a book about his life, ways of life. And Cambridge University eventually bought it before he died in the 1980s. But he was just an amazing chap. He was friends, he didn't just like buy art when he couldn't afford it. He would give his own money to British artists in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s when he didn't really have much, because artists would struggle. Ben Nicholson and Winifred Nicholson weren't rich in the 20s and 30s at all. So he would give them the money, and he was like a friend to them all, and he knew Ben and Nick and Winifred really well. He knew Henry Moore.
Where would he
Barbara
go?
Hepworth.
So, I mean, these are names that are familiar to us, but at the time, when he was buying, I mean, you say, I mean, it is that thing. How actually does someone start buying if they're not from hugely wealthy stock? Yes, you can have an eye for art, but it's still that's some achievement in itself to be able to buy if you're not actually looking to buy, to place in a gallery, to sell on and to make money that way, in terms of the model of, let's say, the White Cube Gallery or whatever. So how was he able to afford this? How would he have the contacts to buy from what became influential artists? Was he just ahead of the curve constantly with artists that he spotted that had talent?
Personally, go and visit them in the studios, wherever that was, whether it was in London or Cornwall, or Paris. He'd go to Paris and he became friends with Picasso.
That's where Picasso's work,
Or he'd invite them to his house. So he had an open house policy. He'd invite people to come, and have Sunday lunch, and they might stay over in the spare room. So his house was always a place where artists could just turn up and could get a warm welcome and be fed and watered and put up if they wanted to be put up. So he basically he not only championed artists and helped them out, he was also very friendly with them. He was a proper 100% art fan. And the artists knew that, and they also relied on like borrow money off them and stuff. And in return, he would get, they borrow money off him. In return, he'd get a small painting back. And if you want to buy something that you really loved, he would borrow money to do so, or he would go without food, or go without paying the bills, just so he could buy a work of art, which he then put in his house. So he was just absolutely amazing. He was also friends with T. Lawrence Arabia, that sort of guy. And when he lived in Tangier, he once had round for supper. This is amazing. He had round for supper around his table, his wife Helen. He had round Truman Capote, Gore Vidal, and Paul Bowles all at the same table. I mean, he was a champion networker. Before networking was a term, he was already doing it. So he's just an extraordinary guy. He just loved art almost more than anything. And when he had and this is the Edinburgh connection, he also wrote which he appeared in briefly, and it was about the mad sculptor Henri Gaudier, mentioned already. But he then wrote his sort of autobiography called A Way of Life, quite a sort of pretentious autobiography. When he had the launch party for it in 1984, when he lived in Edinburgh, he had the launch party at the DeMarco Gallery. And of course, we know DeMarco well from his massive contributions to the Edinburgh Fringe and the Edinburgh Film Festival and avant-garde art across Europe. He's an amazing person. And the book is so well written.
I mean, traditionally, the road of the critic might, you do as a critic supposedly have to maintain some form of distance in order to be able to retain a position, I think, of neutrality and balance in what you write and say, even if you get to know people well, and that's pretty well inevitable if you stay in any one place for a considerable length of time. So was he in any way compromised as an art critic, or was it just that he was also any offense with what he said, and no artist felt, I'm not giving my work to this chap, given what he said. Am I simplifying that relationship, and or can that happen? I mean, maybe if you're so knowledgeable.
You've put your finger in something here. He wasn't a proper art critic. He didn't have that sense of creating but the artists themselves, who eventually became famous artists, and he was with them at the beginning, they always respect him, not because they always agreed with him, because they knew that he devoted everything and was 100% genuine in his love and support of art. So he was given time and given credit. And it was almost like, because he gave out so much, he got it back, even though he didn't play the game. He never really tried to play the game. He used to hate doing anything tactically for his own benefit, but he had to a bit because he had to raise the money to build the extension to make Kettles Yard more than just one little cottage that he'd bought. And so he had at any point. It was all about the art and all about having a lifestyle revolving around art and around beauty. But he had his blind spots, and there was some great art he didn't like at all, and he was quite opinionated. And Laura Freeman's book is brilliant because it doesn't try to make him into a saint.
No.
It points out all the little flaws, but it treats that just as someone who's human. Like everybody's got flaws.
And she writes also, Graham, like a real person. That is the nature of anyone looking at a piece of art. If you're going to have divided opinions on pieces of art, that is the nature of art. I mean, sometimes.
Yeah, you're right, but there's a difference between taste, because anybody can not like a work of art, even if it's regarded as being worth £50 million. You can go, well, I don't like that. It's a matter of taste. But I think the difference between Jim Eade and the rest of that world was that because he had no career to pursue in it, really. He wasn't anything he believed in was his own belief. It wasn't a belief that had to fit into anybody else's concepts because it would help his career or make sure he kept his job. He didn't give a damn about keeping his job or getting on. Because he was so good, in the 20s and 30s, he got offered various high posts at galleries or academic institutions about art, and he turned them all down because he thought he wouldn't have enjoyed it, so he just didn't do it.
Yeah.
Even though it would have been really great for his so-called career, he just didn't do it. He wasn't that sort of person.
No, no.
But you
So
can feel
Graham,
his presence when you go around Kettles Yard. You can feel Jim and Helen's presence in the house.
yes, yeah.
The main house has been kept the way it was before they moved out to Edinburgh in the late 70s, and it feels like it's still there.
Yeah, in terms of in Edinburgh itself, is there anything that marks the work that he did? I mean, does his sort of Edinburgh finale, is that largely not not gathered in galleries in any way, or no exhibitions are sort of held on a regular basis
Yeah.
to that effect?
Wait a minute, Charles. Jimmy is English, and his main achievement was at Cambridge.
Yeah.
Now, if they can't recognise DeMarco in Edinburgh, who was
Yeah.
born in Edinburgh, who devoted his life to
Yeah.
make Edinburgh and Scotland a much better place for
Yes.
art and culture, if they can't
Yeah.
recognise him, sure as hell ain't going to
Sure.
recognise
No,
Jimmy.
fair
So
point.
I don't think there is.
No,
I don't think there
that's
is.
fair enough. And actually, the fact that Kettles Yard continues to thrive is the main testament to Jim Eade anyway, isn't it? Now, Graham, I
Anyways,
went.
fantastic book. Fantastic
Yeah.
book. It's on Jonathan Cape, by the way.
Yeah. I today went to, or I should actually accurately say, I went back to Low Ousegate in York, which is a disused office block. And it's one of the very tallest buildings in York. And an organization called Bomb Squad, which is an artists collective. Last year, they held in aid of SASH, which is a charity for the homeless. They exhibited on 2 floors of this building. This time, they've expanded it to 4 floors, and it's over the last 3 weekends, running from the Friday through to the Sunday. It's been open from until I think around about 6 in the evening each evening. So what happened is that this group of artists took over this space, and to the extent they've even painted murals on all the walls, all the staircases, as well as having new works on display by both local artists, but also well-established artists such as Inky. And Inky, probably second only to Banksy, is the significant Bristol artist. He's done a piece valued at 2,500. For the title of the exhibition is Rise of the Vandals. And he came to York and put various pieces on the walls, but also did this particular piece. Where it's I think works really well. We've talked before about taking over buildings and giving them an artistic focus. The fact this is only rather concentrated on a short basis of I think 3 weekends, maybe is the one downer with this. But what it confirms is what you can do. It was hugely busy today. All ages were visiting it, even dog friendly. So you had lots of dogs going around this building as well. You had artists there giving talks. James Jessup, a significant figure in the world of murals and graffiti art, was there giving a talk, going through each of the pieces of his that was on show. On the top floor was a shop and also a DJ booth, so run by an artist and a DJ called Soda. So that set the mood and the tone up there.
Was he streaming? Was Soda streaming?
Soda's very good, Graham. But no, that's the thing. No, he wasn't. But you could buy artworks. You could obviously you could buy original works. You could buy print works, T-shirts, mugs, whatever, all sorts, and with a percentage of everything going to SASH, which is so important. That and actually also part of this, Sharon McDonald, the artist, she and Bomb Squad worked with those who are use the services of SASH, and so they created artworks as well. So that made it even more of a community project. The atmosphere was wonderfully exuberant and enjoyable and rebellious as well, which I loved about it. That's still in the tradition of graffiti. You were going to ask?
I love all this. It sounds fantastic, but what pieces of art, which pieces of graffiti art, made you think this is a great piece of work?
So I always like the immediacy, the boldness, the use of color, the striking imagery, the topicality, the rebellious element. I think is important as well within it, and still the idea that you're taking something that's plain in public view and making something artistic of it. It goes back to my point about the world is a better place the more arts that it has. And I think graffiti is part of that. I mean, we know this from graffiti on trains, we know this from graffiti in underground stations, we know this from graffiti in bridges. We also, interestingly, have seen how graffiti has become more formal in the way that it's used in murals now to acknowledge maybe footballing heroes in Leeds, for example, the number of murals that have gone up in celebration of Leeds United, and that applies to many cities. We've obviously seen that you can go around in Belfast and see all the murals that are associated with the Troubles there.
You
So
can
there's
also
always a
see
great,
the undertones,
yes,
the rock band from
correct,
the late 70s. They've got one in Derry,
yeah.
and Pete McKee, the great Sheffield artist, he had
Oh
one
yes, yes,
end
yeah,
of a sort of row of
yeah.
houses had one of his paintings up really big.
I think it's also, I mean, I talk about, this the act of rebellion in doing it, and that, you could be told off for having the cheek to go and do this in a public space.
They
And
used to get arrested, is what used to happen.
that absolutely is what used to happen. And so actually one of the other joys with this exhibition, Keith Hopewell was one of the original graffiti artists in York, and he's become the archivist as well. He still does works now. He did some new works on the walls of Lower Ousegate, as well as having works for sale through his career. But it also did the story going way back to the start of graffiti in York, and where it was concentrated on. And Lehman Road as one of the main places that graffiti was done. And one of the other enjoyable elements was a series of short films in a little film studio, and one of which charted an event called Bustin' Loose, which the leisure department of the city council gave approval for this event to happen, and they took over the Fossbank car park. And
When was that?
graffiti artists came from Sheffield, from
Yeah.
Birmingham, and it turned into an
When
absolute
was this?
riot. It turned into a creative riot. It ended up
Yeah.
with the police
When was this,
having
though,
to
Charles?
close the event down. So this was
When
in
was this, Charles?
this was in 1988, just before I joined the
Really,
press.
that's
Now the
quite
reason,
adventurous. Yeah, yeah, that's
absolutely,
amazing.
I mean, you look at the footage of this. It's quite the building is the car park space, obviously multi-story space, is absolutely crammed with artists and all sorts of other people. And as I say, eventually the police closed the event down, because what had happened, it was next door to, I think, a supermarket. I think it was next door to, and they were sort of bursting through outside, and were thinking, presumably, I guess they were going to perhaps start getting exuberantly spray painting walls or whatever, and the police intervened at that point. Now, interestingly, it just mentioned in passing that the attitude of it just said that the attitude of the local press was, quotes, if I quote Keith well, that
Hostile.
they used the word hate. They
Really?
said they absolutely hated it. Now,
Typical
I've got,
local journalist, Charles.
well, I haven't yet joined the press. I joined the press later that year, and
Yeah.
I'm quite
Was it
sure
that
that I
early? I
would.
thought it was 1990. Oh,
I joined in '88, late '88,
did
and
you? Wow,
yeah,
wow.
yeah,
Well,
and
you would have written that. You would have been nice at the time,
well,
surely.
I'm going to ask the former leader writer of the York Press, Mr. Robert Beaumont, if he can remember what
Oh,
he
yeah.
wrote about this
Oh,
particular
dear. I can
event.
imagine him criticizing it.
And well, I mean, it'd be fascinating to actually to look back and to see what the press exactly did
Mm,
right. Why it took
mm.
something of a negative attitude towards it, even though the city council the leisure department had actually been in favour and has set this event up. I mean,
Yeah.
now you think, when was the last time actually something as radical as this was done in a city by a
Well,
city council?
I have to say that this sounds like the coolest moment ever in York, except when you and me used to judge the Fibbers Battle of the Bands contests.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I mean, I found it a fascinating event to go to. I think It's fair. I don't think graffiti any longer is sort of underappreciated. The significance of Banksy, obviously, the exhibitions that have been held in Bristol about the significance of graffiti. I think all cities now realise how important it is, and also the technique, the skill that goes into it, the artistic skill that could be underappreciated in it. Yes, there's acts of rebellion. Some people might think, oh, disgraceful what they're doing to the walls, but more often than not, the only ones that annoy me are when people just do tags with absolutely no artistic integrity whatsoever. They just write the name up on a
Yeah, but
wall, and you just think, really,
where
can you,
yeah,
But
I,
as soon as it's artworks, I think it's fascinating what's done.
yeah,
Interestingly, um, after the event, Keith Hopewell was asked by the city council if he would do a special one so that they could keep there, and you will still see it in this car park. The artwork that
that's good.
he was commissioned to do a special
Yeah,
artwork because a lot of them were never finished at the time because of the police intervening. So he was expressly asked by the city council to do one, and you can go to the car park and still see
how
that piece of graffiti
how
on the walls in York.
how times have changed, Charles.
Yes,
I would
exactly.
just say one thing.
Yeah,
I totally agree with you about graffiti art, but not all graffiti is a work of art. So, for
no, fair
example,
point.
in my hometown of Grangemouth, you
Yes.
still get people who scroll on walls a certain male appendage or part of the body, which I would suggest is very much not art.
Yeah, there's a walk to the football ground at Leeds, which on the tarmac was
Mm.
exactly what you're describing. A whole row of them, actually. And yeah, I
Yeah,
get, I get you. I'm not going to argue with your point
yeah. It's a bit like
on that
saying
one.
that anybody with a paintbrush in their hand is an artist. Like, you're not an artist just because you've got a paintbrush in your hand.
And I
But
think actually but I think that's what's become apparent that the best artwork going, in America, people obviously refer to an artist like Futura or whatever. The significance of their work is written about in books, etc. So as is the way. So I guess the debating point now is whether it is still seen as an act of rebellion. But I would argue that even what Banksy does is still in some form, all the money that it may be argued that he can make out of his works, but still this thing of doing it in a clandestine way at night is still in some form an act of rebellion and mystery about it.
yeah, it's more the content with Banksy because Banksy is
Yes.
political. To
Yeah.
get back to politics, if Banksy just did fluffy graffiti
Yeah.
with no real social or political point, he
Yeah.
wouldn't be famous and he wouldn't be rebellious. I don't think just because you sneak around at night time makes you necessarily a rebel,
No,
but
I mean it could be someone doing lovely
I know
fluffy.
that it did
It
in the
could be someone
past
just doing
when you would
lovely
get
fluffy
arrested.
balloons. You're right. Yeah. Yeah. And they wouldn't have the same
Exactly.
impact.
Anyway,
So
mm,
Graham,
I
I'm
wish I'd
afraid
seen that.
it's a kind of retrospective look at the event because it's now closed. But I'm hoping that given how well it's gone this year,
Mm.
that this event will return next year. But what it confirms is my constant banging on about how to use in interesting ways disused buildings in the city centre and don't just turn everything into
I'll
hotels.
tell you what. I'll tell you what you should do, Charles, and I agree with that as
Mm.
well. You should write your review of that event on the side of a wall in New York.
Absolutely, Graham, and then see what happens with that. If I write it in flower, which is what Dexter used to do, Dexter, who doesn't feature in the exhibition, disappointingly, Jonathan Bonner, a legendary York artist, and he used to do graffiti in I think in flower and basically, well, in materials that once the rain came, then the graffiti would disappear because he was actually I think he was
That's
a
a good idea because that
if I
means you're not
remember, he was
causing any
actually arrested
damage.
by the police, and he could just say to them, "Look, bit
Yeah.
of patience. Once it rains, it'll disappear."
Well,
So
it's
that
not
was his
criminal
act of
damage.
rebellion.
It
Mm.
can't be criminal damage then. That's a smart move on that man's part.
Time for an interruption, Graham.
Oh yeah, well, bizarrely, like George Harrison, the Beatles. Well, who doesn't? And his
Yeah,
great love of indie music and Eastern mysticism and religion.
yeah,
Well, Danny Harrison's son,
yeah.
who was only a kid when he was in the concert for George tribute concert, middle-aged man himself, but still doing music.
Mm.
And if you think George Harrison's son Danny will end up doing musically, what's actually happened is exactly what you predicted. So Danny's got a new album called Dreamer's Field, and in this album he teams up with Hun Hua Tu, which is the throat singing masters from Tuva in the Russian Federation's Far East, who sing in an
Oh,
ancient vocal style.
gosh.
and not only that, but he recorded the album of these amazing musicians, these
Mm.
amazing singers, in the Henley and Thames home studio that George recorded a lot of the Living Material World album from 1973. And it's released on George Harrison's record label, Dark Horse Records. So bloomin' Ada, you couldn't get more George Harrison than what Danny's just done.
Absolutely. I
It's
mean,
it's just uncanny. It's like George never died.
Yeah, carrying on in the family tradition. Absolutely. And that's still in its own way. I mean, it's hands across the water, which George was very much in. Obviously, clearly, he was very much into that. Obviously, with working with, working with mysticism and working with Ravi Shankar and whatever. So that is absolutely continuing that tradition, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, have you bought the album, or have you just read about it?
I've listened to. I'm not going to say I've streamed it because obviously I'll only buy CDs, but I've listened to it digitally, and yeah, it's great. I love it.
Now, Graham, I think we're in our last major topic for the evening is the positive news about Edinburgh International Film Festival. It's not the positive news that you and I are going to the festival, but let's have that positive news about this summer's Edinburgh International Film Festival.
Well, after years of decline in financial trouble and the film house closing and the charity behind the film house and the International Film Festival, going bankrupt, since then they've bought the film house and the film festival has been sort of resurrected. And last year when we went, which was the 76th year, it was mainly held at the Everyman Cinema, and I like the Everyman Cinema in Harrogate, got a lot of films there. But for the film festival, based on a love of film and taking it really seriously, it felt almost like you were holding a punk rock gig, a fashion show. It just didn't. It was too glamorous. It was too glitzy, too glamorous.
It was.
Didn't suit it. Well, guess where most of the films are taking place this year? Cameo.
Our favourite cinema.
Yeah. They haven't shown films during.
I thought the BBC at half time. Oh, there we go. We're back to it. Right. Welcome back, Graham. So we were just talking about the structure of the Edinburgh Film. Excuse me, the Edinburgh International Film Festival for 2024, and the good structure that is in place in terms of how it will benefit maybe the film stock that's shown. How do you see that changing for this year?
Well, the Edinburgh Film Festival is always best at covering world cinema.
Yeah.
Quite often of an independent nature, but not always, and quite often of a proper art house nature, with new British releases and documentaries. Those are the three strands they've always been thrown at. And this year, the opening film, August, tapping back in. So they're tapping into the history, and they're playing to the strengths, led by someone in the shape of Paul Reid, who knows exactly what he's doing. So I'm feeling quite positive about the whole film festival. It may revive successfully to be the force it used to be only 15, 20 years ago.
That would be wonderful news. I mean, we've seen, brick by brick, we've seen a rebuilding from a difficult situation. Obviously, the film house was closed last year when we were in Edinburgh, and emotionally, that was, that when you look at that, and we felt really low at that point. And brick by brick, though, things have changed and improved. So hopefully the reward for that will be a reblossoming of the festival, and it's great credit to the festival organisers, but also actually to the Scottish government as well, and to all the funding that's actually been brought back into it from this very low point that they were at. So can't wait to get back there to see how it's going to be. So that's going to be a joyous back in the small car with two big egos, revving up again to get there, and looking forward to do that. Now we're into the last minute, Graham. So have you got one last thought for us?
Well, the International Film Festival is the opposite of what the summer film program is at the main cinemas. Yes. You can expect to look forward to or not Deadpool and Wolverine, Twisters, The Crow remake, Beetlejuice, and a strange film starring Scarlett Johansson about the moon landing being faked.
You've been listening to the podcast Two Big Egos in a Small Car. Your hosts were Graham Chalmers and Charles Hutchinson. This was a Baltic sub-production.